Fake heiress. Preston Whitmore said it loud enough for the entire rooftop to hear. 50 guests. Champagne flutes, the Atlanta skyline glittering behind him, and looked at the 17-year-old girl in the emerald dress like she was a stain on an expensive suit. Zara Okafor didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't reach for her phone. She looked at Preston Whitmore with the particular stillness of a person who has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment, and she said quietly enough that only he could hear, "Check your shareholder registry, Mr. Whitmore." What came next? The silence, the phone call, the color draining from Preston Whitmore's face in real time in front of 50 witnesses. Would be the last public appearance he made as the majority owner of anything? His hands started trembling before he even reached his attorney. By the time someone caught him, the ground had already moved. 6 years earlier. This is where it begins. Zara Okafor was 11 years old the first time she understood that money was a language, and that some people were taught it young and some people were never taught it at all, and that the difference between those two groups was not intelligence or effort or character, it was access. She understood this not from a book or a classroom, but from watching her father, Daniel Okafor, sit at the kitchen table in their apartment in East Point, Georgia, with a stack of papers and a calculator and the expression of a man who was very good at the work he did and completely alone in figuring out how the world around that work operated. Daniel ran a small landscaping company, 7 employees, 3 trucks, contracts with a dozen commercial properties around Atlanta's South Side. He was a meticulous man. His trucks were maintained, his crews were reliable, his clients renewed year after year because Daniel Okafor did what he said he would do, on time, without incident. He had built something real from nothing, he knew it, and he also knew, in a way he'd never quite found words for, that what he'd built had a ceiling he couldn't see through, and that the ceiling had something to do with the stack of papers on the kitchen table and the things on those papers that nobody had ever taught him to read. He never hid this from Zara. That was the thing. He didn't pretend to know things he didn't know, didn't perform confidence he didn't have about the parts of the business world that remained opaque to him. He let her sit beside him at that kitchen table. He showed her the papers. He said simply, "I don't always understand these. Someone should." Zara started reading. By 13, she was reading her father's contracts before he signed them, cross-referencing terms against resources she found online, flagging clauses that didn't look right to her, and explaining why in neat handwritten notes she left on the kitchen table. At 14, she found a billing error in one of Daniel's commercial contracts, a compounding fee structure that had been quietly overcharging him for 2 years, and wrote a 3-page analysis documenting it. Daniel took the analysis to the client. The client cut him a check for $14,000 and, visibly embarrassed, asked who had prepared the document. Daniel said his daughter. The client said nothing. He was a white man in his 60s and Zara was a black 14-year-old girl, and the arithmetic of that moment was not lost on either Daniel or his daughter. She filed it away in the part of her mind where she filed things that required a longer response than she was currently equipped to give. At 15, Zara discovered the Atlanta Youth Investment Forum, a program run by a financial education nonprofit that placed high school students in mentorship relationships with local business owners and investors, taught them the mechanics of equity and valuation and capital allocation, and culminated each year in a pitch competition where students proposed actual investment opportunities to a panel of real investors. The entry process was competitive. She applied with a 20-page research document she had written herself, an analysis of undervalued commercial real estate corridors in Atlanta's South Side, built from public data, her father's operational knowledge, and 14 months of her own observation. She was accepted. The program changed the architecture of what she believed was possible. Her mentor was a woman named Evelyn Cross, 48 years old, second-generation venture capitalist, one of the few black women managing a fund of any size in Atlanta's investment community. Evelyn had seen hundreds of students come through programs like this. She had never seen a 15-year-old who read financial instruments the way Zara Okafor read them, with the fluency of someone for whom the language had always been native, even though nobody had taught her formally. She told Zara this directly in their 3rd session and watched the girl receive the compliment with the particular composure of someone who already knew it and had been waiting to have it confirmed. Evelyn taught her everything that the program taught, plus everything she knew besides: capital structures, dilution, preferred shares, liquidation preferences, the specific mechanics by which a person could acquire meaningful ownership in a company without having the cash to write a single check, through sweat equity, through convertible notes, through the patient accumulation of positions that the person on the other side of the table didn't value correctly because they didn't know what they had. The most powerful thing in any deal, Evelyn told her once, is knowing something the other person doesn't know you know. Zara wrote that down. She taped it to the wall above her desk. It stayed there for 2 years. Then she found Whitmore Commercial Properties. Preston Whitmore was 47 years old, the second-generation owner of a mid-sized commercial real estate firm his father had built in Atlanta's north side suburbs during the 1990s boom. The firm managed 43 properties, office parks, strip centers, a few mixed-use developments generating consistent cash flow that Preston had spent 15 years not growing. Not because the opportunities weren't there, because Preston Whitmore was a man who had inherited both money and the particular confidence that comes with inherited money, and that confidence had calcified, over time, into a conviction that the way things had always worked was the way things were supposed to work. He was not dishonest, not precisely. He paid his contracts, honored his agreements, kept his buildings occupied at rates that satisfied his accountant, if not his potential. He was simply the kind of businessman who had never been made uncomfortable enough to improve, who moved through rooms where everyone looked like him, thought like him, had access to the same information he had, and who therefore never had to reckon with the possibility that he was missing something. He had a habit at industry events of assessing newcomers with a speed that he called instinct, and that was in practice a set of assumptions so well worn they had become invisible to him. Who looked like they belonged? Who looked like they were performing belonging? Who was worth his time and who was someone else's problem? It was an old machine, running on old fuel, and it had never once in Preston Whitmore's life been interrupted by consequences. He had arrived at the Atlanta Real Estate Investors Association summer reception at 7 o'clock, worked the room for 20 minutes with a glass of bourbon, and the ease of a man who had been attending events like this for 2 decades. He knew most of the faces, he knew which conversations would be useful and which would be pleasant, and which were purely obligation. He moved through them all with the practiced efficiency of someone whose social skill had been built to serve his business interests rather than his curiosity. He paused at one point near a pair of institutional investors, good men, regional pension fund allocation, the kind of relationship worth maintaining, and noticed they were engaged with someone he didn't recognize. He clocked the emerald dress, the jewelry, the youth which he registered as inexperience. He gave it 30 seconds, then moved on. Someone would introduce them if it mattered. It was 40 minutes later when the small crowd near the railing had grown and the quality of the attention in that corner of the rooftop had shifted. The specific concentration of people who had stopped performing their own conversations and started listening to someone else's, that Preston looked over again. The girl was still there, still talking. The 2 institutional investors were still with her. But now, there were 4 other people around them, and none of them were looking at their phones. Preston crossed the room with the intention of a man who runs things, introducing himself to someone who doesn't yet know what that means. Preston Whitmore, he said, extending a hand. Whitmore Commercial. And you are? Zara Okafor. She shook his hand. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were direct. I've actually been looking forward to meeting you. Oh? Preston's smile settled into the patronizing warmth that wealthy men in their late 40s deploy with teenage girls at professional events. Indulgent, amused, the warmth of someone who has already decided the conversation will be brief. Are you in school nearby? Intern with someone here? I'm a shareholder, Zara said. Preston blinked. I'm sorry? In Whitmore Commercial Properties, I've held a position for about 8 months. One of the institutional investors, the younger one, a methodical man named Carl who had been listening to Zara discuss cap rates for the better part of 20 minutes, kept his expression neutral. He had an idea of what was coming. He had been waiting to see if Preston did too. He didn't. Preston's smile held. Barely. I think there may be some confusion. Whitmore Commercial is privately held. It's a family company. I'd know if, through the Peachtree Equity Partners convertible note instrument, Zara said, issued 14 months ago when you needed bridge financing for the Brookhaven development. Peachtree holds a 15% equity stake with conversion rights that triggered when you missed the 18-month performance threshold last quarter. A brief pause. Evelyn Cross manages the Peachtree Fund. I've been a junior equity participant in the fund since I was 16. My allocation includes a proportional stake in every instrument the fund holds. The color was already moving in Preston Whitmore's face. Not gone yet. Moving. That's not. Started again. The conversion rights are contingent on a trailing 12-month revenue threshold of 4.2 million. Your Q3 filing showed 3.8. She said it without triumph, without performance, just the delivery of information that had been sitting in a file, waiting. The conversion triggered automatically. Peachtree's 15% became voting preferred shares. Evelyn filed the updated cap table with the state 8 weeks ago. Preston was very still, but his voice had lost its warmth, its register. It had become something small and searching. That's only 15%. That's not. I said I was a shareholder, Zara said. I didn't say that was the only instrument. What came next? Preston Whitmore would spend a long time trying not to think about. The two institutional investors near the railing had gone quiet. A small group had gathered at the edge of the conversation. Not intrusively, just the organic gravity of a room that could feel something important happening at its edge. 18 months ago, Zara continued, your Decatur Avenue property portfolio went to market as a distressed sale. 3 buildings, undermanaged, carrying maintenance deferred across 2 ownership cycles. You listed them collectively at 4.1 million. They sat for 7 months with no offers because the market knew the deferred maintenance number and nobody wanted to price it in. She reached into her clutch and produced a folded document, opened it on the railing between them. I acquired them at 3.6 through a holding entity. Rehabbed them over 12 months using a contractor my father's network referred. Current appraised value is 6.9 million, but that's not the relevant number. She pointed to a line on the document. When I acquired the portfolio, your company's operating agreement gave any party holding more than 30% of the Decatur Avenue corridor first right of refusal on any equity recapitalization of the parent company. I hold 34% of that corridor. Combined with Evelyn's Peachtree stake and 2 additional positions I've accumulated through secondary market instruments over the past 6 months. She looked at him. I hold 51% of Whitmore commercial properties. The rooftop went very quiet. Preston Whitmore's hand reached for the railing. Found it. His face had passed through white and arrived somewhere past it. That particular pallor that comes not from a single shock but from the simultaneous arrival of many things that had been true for a long time without being known. The drinks were still in people's hands. The skyline was still there. But the geometry of the room had shifted in a way that everyone present could feel, even the people who didn't know the specific numbers. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. His knees buckled first, then the rest of him followed, and the man who had called her a faked heiress in front of 50 people 30 minutes earlier went down sideways on the rooftop of the Atlanta Real Estate Investors Association summer reception, and the people standing nearest him moved to catch him. And someone called for water, and someone else called for the elevator. And through all of it, Zara Okafor stood at the railing with the document in her hands and watched with the composed, patient expression of someone who had known how this night would end since before she walked through the door. She had not come to this event to prove anything to Preston Whitmore. She had come because Evelyn Cross had told her once, when you hold a position, you show up. You let the position speak, and you do not explain yourself to anyone who wasn't willing to take you seriously before you had something they wanted. She folded the document, put it back in her clutch, took a sip of her sparkling water. Someone should get him some air, she said, to no one in particular. Someone did. The restructuring of Whitmore commercial properties took 4 months. Zara's attorneys, a corporate law firm in Midtown that Evelyn Cross recommended, and that took the case with a speed that told Zara everything about how the legal community valued what she'd built. Worked through the cap table, the operating agreements, the conversion mechanics with the precision of people settling a question that had already been answered. Preston Whitmore's own lawyers contested 3 of the instrument positions, lost 2 of the 3 challenges within 30 days. The third settled out of court on terms that were by any reading favorable to Zara. Preston retained a 31% minority stake. He was no longer the majority owner of anything he had inherited. He remained on the board in an advisory capacity. a fact that Zara had specifically requested, not out of generosity, though people assumed generosity, but out of the strategic clarity Evelyn had spent 2 years teaching her. A cooperative minority shareholder was worth more than a hostile one. You didn't remove people you could still use. You repositioned them. The first board meeting under the new cap table was held on a Wednesday morning in October in a conference room on the 22nd floor of a midtown office building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that Zara had grown up in and was now, in some small but measurable sense, reshaping. 7 people around the table. Zara, 2 of her attorneys, Evelyn Cross, 1 representative from a co-investor group, the company's CFO, and Preston Whitmore, who sat at the far end and had the compressed look of a man learning to occupy a smaller space than he was used to. Zara ran the meeting. She ran it the way she ran everything, prepared, precise, without performance. She had reviewed every line item in the quarterly reports, had questions about 2 capital allocation decisions in the Brookhaven property that the CFO answered without the ability to hide that they had not been asked before, had a revised operating strategy for the Decatur Avenue portfolio that she walked through in 17 minutes with slides she had prepared herself. Preston said 3 things during the 2-hour meeting. All 3 were technically accurate contributions. The third about a city zoning variance he had navigated in 2019 that was relevant to one of Zara's proposed developments was genuinely useful. She thanked him for it, sincerely, without irony, because Evelyn had also taught her that the worst thing you could do with information was refuse it based on who it came from. Daniel Okafor sat in a chair against the wall, not an officer, not a shareholder, not even introduced to Preston, who probably assumed he was an assistant. He sat very still for 2 hours with his hands on his knees and watched his daughter run a meeting about a company she owned, and said nothing because nothing was required. After the meeting, in the elevator going down, he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him the way she had when she was 11 years old at the kitchen table with the stack of papers neither of them fully understood. "I still can't read half of what you build," he said. She looked up at him. "You taught me to read all of it." He didn't try. 3 years after the rooftop, Zara Okafor, 20 years old, sophomore year at Wharton, deferred while she managed the Whitmore portfolio's expansion, was invited back to speak at the Atlanta Youth Investment Forum's annual pitch competition. The same program that had placed her with Evelyn Cross at 15, the same fluorescent-lit conference room in the same nonprofit office building on Peachtree Street. Different faces. She had said yes to the invitation in under an hour, not because of obligation, because of the specific image she'd been carrying for 5 years. Her own face at 15, sitting in a chair against the wall in this room while a mentor she hadn't met yet explained the mechanics of convertible notes. And because she understood now that every person in that room was sitting at a kitchen table with a stack of papers they didn't fully know how to read yet, and that what they needed was not inspiration, but information. She stood at the podium and looked out at 45 high school students, mostly from Atlanta's South Side, mostly from the neighborhoods that commercial real estate had extracted value from for decades without returning it, mostly from households where the stack of papers on the kitchen table was a source of dread rather than understanding. She talked about her father, about the kitchen table, about the $14,000 check that came back from a client who had spent 2 years overcharging him, and the look on that client's face when Daniel said his daughter had written the analysis. She said, "The world will tell you that you don't have access to the rooms where real decisions are made, and for a while that will be true. But access is not the only way into a room. Knowledge is a way in. Patience is a way in. Understanding what the person on the other side of the table doesn't understand about their own position, that is a way in. It has always been a way in. It will always be a way in. I walked in because I owned part of what he owned, and I wanted him to know it." Another pause, shorter, landing differently. "He called me a fake heiress. He wasn't wrong about the word. I didn't inherit anything. I built it." The 45 students in front of her were silent for a moment, the particular silence of people receiving something they intend to keep. Then the room broke open. In the back row, Evelyn Cross sat with her hands folded and a small private smile that she reserved for moments that had been a very long time coming. She had spent 30 years in investment, had mentored 14 young people through this program and others like it, and had never once stopped believing that the rooms where decisions were made would look different if you were patient and strategic, and didn't mistake access for the only currency that mattered. She watched Zara Okafor at that podium and felt the specific satisfaction of someone whose best investment had just paid off in a currency that didn't appear on any balance sheet. Beside her, an empty seat with a jacket draped over it, Daniel Okafor had stepped out to take a call, and on the seat, visible to Evelyn and no one else, a handwritten note Zara had left for her father that morning before the event. It said, "You showed me the papers. The rest was just reading."